So he has time for Whoopi Goldberg, but he doesn't have time for world leaders?
No, Chris, look, the president is going to be actively involved at the UN General Assembly.
He's not meeting with any private leaders. He's giving a speech.
Chris, they have telephones in the White House. Last week he talked to the president of Egypt. He talked to the leader in Libya. We don't need a meeting in Washington just to confer with leaders. We've got
But he does need the time to be on The View.
We have a strong diplomatic. I'm sure if he was doing an interview with you on Fox News, you'd have no problem with that.
Well, he hasn't, but that's not the point.
I'm sure that's not the point. No, look, Chris, he's got a strong schedule. He's actively involved.
You don't have a problem with the fact that he's not meeting with any world leaders, but he's going to appear on The View?
I have no problem with that because, Chris, you're the president of the United States every minute of every day.
They're the leaders of morning television. That was senior Obama campaign advisor Robert Gibbs yesterday on why President Obama will not be meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel or any world leaders when they come to New York for the UN General Assembly this week. We see the president hopping on Air Force One here just moments ago, but as he leaves to sit down with Whoopi Goldberg and the other ladies on The View this afternoon, the White House says his schedule is too jam-packed to squeeze in any face-to-face meetings this week. As Chris Wallace mentioned, the critics are holding up what is basically a televised campaign appearance to ask where the president's priorities lie. Is that fair? Joining me now, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, Brad Blakeman, and former pollster for Bill Clinton and author of the book 52 Reasons to Vote for Obama, Bernard Whitman. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
And so, is it a fair debate to be having, Brad, when you heard Robert Gibbs say, we have this magic invention called telephones, and you're president every minute of every day, and you don't have to take advantage of being in New York City when the world leaders are there to engage in diplomacy and outreach?
Well, it's the tail wagging the dog. I know something about this. I scheduled the president for 3 years, George W. Bush, and quite frankly, we wouldn't have had time for The View because it would have been jam-packed with bilaterals at the Waldorf where world leaders were coming one after the other to sit down with the president and have a discussion, something that you really can't accomplish on the other end of a telephone. There's no substitute to sitting down with a leader and the other people that he brings to the meeting to talk about the heady issues. Look, if everything was great in the world, you'd still want to have the kind of reaction and bilaterals you'd have with foreign leaders. The fact is, we've just had the largest terrorist attack to the American people on September 11th, the 11th anniversary. Our ambassador's dead, 3 other Americans dead, millions taking to the streets against America, burning the flag. Europe is in an economic meltdown. China's building a blue ocean navy, and the president doesn't have time to meet with world leaders? It should be the other way around. He shouldn't have time to do The View. But this White House has priorities, and to this president, politics is show business, and he feels much more comfortable sitting down with a celebrity than he does a journalist.
Bernard?
I think it's absolutely laughable that Chris Wallace is schooling the president on how to conduct foreign affairs. Let's look at the record. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at what this president has accomplished in 3.5 years. He ended the war in Iraq, a war that we never should have gotten into. Excuse me, let me finish.
Because listen, I'm going to give you the floor, Bernard, but let's stay on point. We're not looking back over 3 years to talk about a history lesson. The question is it fair for them to criticize him for meeting with the ladies of The View but not world leaders? It's not about whether he has a good foreign policy record or not.
It absolutely is, because we're talking about policy, we're talking about benefits. We ought to talk about what the benefits are to the American people and how the American people view this leader to determine whether or not his policy is working.
I will decide what we ought to talk about, because my producers and I spend a lot of time in the mornings trying to decide that. I want to give you the floor, but I want you to stay on point.
With all due respect, I'm not talking about what we should be talking about. I'm talking about what the American people should be talking about. We should look at what the results have been, what this president has been able to deliver in terms of foreign policy, how the American people view this leader. Even your Fox News poll has him at a 54-39 advantage over Mitt Romney when it comes to foreign policy. So obviously, whatever this president is doing to end wars, to get rid of Osama bin Laden, to take out terrorists, is working. And so the fact that the opposition...
I just don't think you do President Obama any favors in arguing his side when you won't stay on point. Brad, I'm trying to talk about whether... President Obama, let's just assume for purposes of this argument, he's been the best president on foreign policy we've ever had in the first 3.5 years. The question is whether this makes sense, to go on The View, to sit down with the Pimp with the Limp radio show, to be with Beyonce and Jay-Z while he's not meeting with these world leaders and while we have this trouble going on overseas. That's all I'm trying to get to.
And I think it's critical. I think what's fair is to sort of look at how this president operates, look at the results that he gets. I'm not in charge of his schedule. If he has time to sit down and talk with the American people through listening to what the ladies on the couch with you have to say, so much the better. I think this president has delivered a secure world. Yes, there are problems, but the fact is, every person does not get the chance to meet with the president of the United States. And just because they happen to be in New York,
more dangerous world
he
under
can meet with
President
everybody who
Obama.
wants to meet with him.
Okay, all right. But Brad, you too. Just stay on whether. Okay,
sure.
Because, again, we could debate his foreign policy, whether it's working. We've done that. But I want to talk about the optics here, because that seems what Chris Wallace seems to be going for. Like, why wouldn't you make time for world leaders?
Absolutely.
But does he need to do that, Brad? Does he need to do that? Because Robert Gibbs has a point. There are ways of communicating without sitting down face to face. What is the grand benefit in being across from one another at the table?
It's incumbent upon the President of the United States to do the job that he's called to do, and that is to be running our foreign policy, and that requires meeting with world leaders. Look, every year the UNGA convenes in New York. It's the largest gathering of world leaders in the entire year. Why wouldn't the President of the United States, especially in these troubled times, want to meet with them?
He is.
Sit down with them, discuss with them, and try and figure out a better way to make this a more peaceful world. You're not going to get that at The View, but you will get it speaking to world leaders at the UN.
He's going to be speaking
but
to
the fact that the President
The
doesn't
View
want...
may have some thoughts on making the world more peaceful.
Right.
I'm not sure. But Bernard, let me ask you, because the one that he's really taken most criticism for not meeting with is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, who, some sources in Israel are saying outright that he requested a meeting and was denied. The White House said that's not true. They said the president has a busy schedule, why shouldn't he just sit down and meet with him? There are some who are saying that they don't believe Netanyahu likes President Obama, and politically it's a smart move not to fall into what is a trap, but nonetheless Israel is a key strategic ally of ours.
Well, that's way above my pay grade to determine who he should be meeting with as president, but I will tell you this. Netanyahu pointedly said, rejected the attempt to say, the U.S. is throwing Israel into the bus. He pointedly said, when asked about it last week, there is no bus. Obama has been very steadfast in the support of Israel. I think Benjamin Netanyahu understands that and recognizes that. And sometimes the best way to deliver a message is not to have a sit-down face-to-face. We are engaged with the Israelis as well as numerous allies and other individuals and states on a whole variety of fronts and a whole variety of planes, and sitting down one-on-one so the press can take a look and take pictures is not necessarily the best way to communicate a foreign policy.
Wait, I want to give you a chance to respond, Brad, but I do want to say this. The president made news on 60 Minutes last night when Steve Croft asked him, do you feel any pressure from Netanyahu in the middle of a campaign to try to get you to change your policy and draw a line in the sand when it comes to Iran? You don't feel any pressure? Here's how the president answered.
When it comes to our national security decisions, any pressure that I feel is simply to do what's right for the American people. And I am going to block out any noise that's out there.
That's getting him in trouble in some circles today because he seems to be making a reference to the noise of Netanyahu. Brad?
Look, Netanyahu said himself he'd meet the president anywhere, Washington, New York, and the fact is he was rebuffed by this president. It is clear that Israel is on the verge of doing something in anticipation of Iran getting nuclear weapons. The fact that this president doesn't feel it necessary to meet and send a signal to our adversaries as to where America is going to stand behind. Are we behind Israel or not? The fact that we're not meeting with Netanyahu sends a terrible signal to the world as to what our allegiance is to Israel and what we might do if Israel must act. So the fact that Israel cannot get a meeting with this president when they're both in New York together, I think speaks volumes, and it's dangerous.
Well, I have good news, because I heard that Netanyahu called up Whoopi, and she's going to be relaying a couple of questions.
I think what's dangerous is the fact that Romney wants to outsource our foreign policy decisions to Israel and let Israel make a judgment about what the best interests of foreign policy are.
No, Israel's our ally,
right,
and we should be standing with our friends.
It is our foreign policy on behalf of us first and our allies.
You guys could continue. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.